So it seems that we've got the first Aeldari rules reveal today, and it seems to be a big one. Strands of Fate dice manipulation is out, and battle focus is in, with a rather powerful system of movement buffs that all manner of Aeldari units can trigger at any time. Let's talk about the new rule and the power it brings to the faction. Hello and welcome back to Warspets Tactics, where today we're talking Aeldari, and for this one we're looking at the first of the Aeldari rules previews for the new Codex. This week we should be getting a whole load of fun details for the new Space Elves. Unlike a bunch of recent Warhammer releases, they've decided not to go with a big Battle Force launch box, but instead just release all of their kits individually. The new Aeldari book is going up for pre-order on Saturday the 25th of January, so that means things should ship out and full releases in stores should be on Saturday the 8th of February. In this one we've got the new Aeldari Codex, 4 new Phoenix Lords including the rather fun Warp Spider one Lycus. Pretty much all of their sculpts have gone down great though. 3 new sets of Aspect Warriors with updated Fire Dragons, Warp Spiders and Swooping Hawks, a couple of reboxes for some older vehicle kits, and also some new dice and data cards. No sign of any new Aeldari Combat Patrol yet though, and no Battle Force launch box, and having no Battle Force felt a bit weird for them, given that Games Workshop have been very trigger happy with those throughout 10th edition so far. So perhaps seems a little bit odd that they let this opportunity go, given that they've got a whole bunch of new shiny Aspect Warrior kits to sell big box sets to us. In any case, in the ramp up for this, we should be getting a bunch of Aeldari previews over the week. As ever, if you were looking to pick up some new shiny Phoenix Lords and Aspect Warriors, feel free to check out the discount links in the video description. Discount retailers usually tend to be the best place to pick things up rather than Games Workshop's web store due to having directly cheaper products. Element Games in the UK has 15% off, Gap Games in Australia has 21%, Fenris Workshop has 10% off, Wargame Portal in the USA has 15%, and Tash and Galdeep in the EU has between 16 to 20%. If anyone does happen to be jumping on the new releases, all of those do help to support the channel and keep the videos coming if you were ordering in something anyway. These are the pre-order times for the releases. Unlike with big FOMO box sets, there should be fairly good supply to go around of these guys. It might just be more that individual stores run out of individual items fairly fast, so still maybe doesn't hurt to be a bit earlier if you were picking up something anyway. In any case, a big thank you to anyone supporting the channel through those. Let's get into the rules previews though, and it seems that for this one we've got one focusing on the new Aeldari core rule, which is really quite a big and involved one as it goes. Trading out Strands of Fate for a massive amount of movement options that you can deploy 4 times at a 2000 point game, and it's the return of their faction rule battle focus, which has often been their main one for a while now. I feel like it's big enough that it definitely needed a dedicated article and video towards it, though we also got the new special rule for the Guardian Defenders too. In any case, Battle Focus will be replacing their Strands of Fate core rule. This is the one where Aeldari players roll a bunch of dice at the start of the game and then wind up feeding those dice into units and rolls, often with Farseers to help them out with making those dice 6s. Often plugging automatic 6s into, say, devastating wound weapons like D-cannons can be a good idea, and they can make support weapons very scary. Or doing automatic 6s to Overwatch, such as, say, the Avatar of Cain or Fugan. They can potentially be pretty devastating to heavy hitters advancing on them. There's plenty of other big uses for those as well, of course. Apparently this rule is still going to be a thing, but it's going to be in a slightly different form and locked to the Seer Council detachment. And it also means that a good few units that actually key off the Strands of Fate rule will have to have their datasheet rule changed. All 3 of the Farseers have that at the moment, but also the Guardian Defenders and Wraith Lord, so it is going to have a few knock-on effects for how a bunch of other units work too. I think swapping to a movement boost one isn't necessarily the worst thing for the Aeldari as a whole. I think that this one's still quite nice that it'll exist in the Seer Council. It all feels very lore appropriate, casting the runes and then deciding the fates. As mentioned, Battle Focus has been the Aeldari special rule for a fair few editions. I believe in 7th edition it had a fair bit of move shoot move going on. In 8th edition it was a lot less impactful though, just going to advance and shoot without taking the -1 to hit penalty, which was pretty tame as it went. 9th edition with the Aeldari Codex that came sort of mid to late edition, that gave you either the opportunity to advance and shoot, or basically move shoot and then move d6 inches, so you could have your units pop out, shoot something, and then fade away behind terrain so the enemy couldn't get to them once more. So if you happened to actually be going through terrain, you took a -3 inch penalty, so it wasn't super easy to just bounce one side of ruined walls and then back to it. You'd have the chance of being just left out in the open. It was still a pretty impactful rule to have at an army-wide level though. It meant that good gun platforms could just peek out the side of terrain, shoot the enemy, and have a pretty reasonable chance to get somewhere where you'd struggle to hit them back. It did mean that Aeldari were one of the strongest factions for a while, though high points cost and unit efficiencies did have them balanced out, and they were fairly mid-tier later in the edition. In general though, I feel like army-wide move shoot move perhaps isn't the best thing for game interaction. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem that they've been let out of the gate with that, though this new mechanic I think is a lot more interesting and still has loads of power. Getting into the new rule though, It basically seems to be a system of Eldar movement and power-ups, where basically you have a number of different battle focus tokens over the course of a battle round, and then you can plug those into sort of stratagem-like abilities, generally allowing your units to move in different, more powerful ways. There's some reactive moves, and there's a deny overwatch one, and just flat-out faster movement. It doesn't really feel exactly the same as any one system we've had in 10th edition so far, though sort of feels similar to a few things. The choice of 6 abilities maybe feels a little bit like guard orders, though it's not dependent on commanders or anything. The abilities and the tokens to use them kind of feel like stratagems in their own way, and I guess maybe the point system to activate different non-stratagem abilities maybe feels a little bit similar to the Cabal points of the Thousand Suns. In any case, at 2,000 point games you're going to be able to make use of 4 of these, and it's 2 at Incursion or 6 at Onslaught. So it's basically 2 battle focus rules per 1,000 points per battle round. Each one of these points gets plugged into the Agile Maneuvers selected from a list of 6 abilities. It looks like each one only costs 1 battle focus token, so you can select them quite freely. And there are just a couple of restrictions. A unit can't do more than 1 of them per phase, so you couldn't say have boosted movement and also deny overwatch. And you also can't use the same Agile Maneuver anywhere in the army more than once per phase either. So say if you had 2 units that wanted to deny overwatch, you'd have to choose 1. A few units will have specific rules or datasheet abilities saying that they can use these in extra time or for free. And one example that they've given so far are the Guardian Defenders, though I wouldn't be too surprised if there's more, either with stratagems or having some of the other unit abilities sort of transfigured into these. In the Codex it looks like most units will gain access to them. Wraith Knights and vehicles do appear to be able to access them, and they said that Wraith Guard and Wraith Blades only get them if led by a Spirit Seer. So I guess extra incentive to include one of those if you're putting them on the table. Getting into the list of buffs and options though, first up we have Star Engines, and this one's the only one that's locked to vehicles only. When an eligible vehicle unit from your army is selected to make a normal move, you get an extra d6 plus 1 inch movement, so it basically means that you could move extra far to gain a line of sight or get onto an objective or something. The fact that it's triggered on a normal move means that you can't make use of this if you advance, but in a way this sort of equates to being able to advance and shoot because you get the similar boost to your movement that advancing would get you, and even better than that as it comes as a +1. They mentioned in the article that it means that say a fire prism could have all the way up to potentially 21 inches worth of movement and still shooting. Though it is going to be a bit random, it'll be somewhere between 16 and 21 inches, but still does seem pretty powerful, and I guess if they wanted to do a nuisance charge on top of that, they'd still be able to, as it's a normal move. Wraith Lords and Wraith Knights wouldn't be able to use this, as they're monsters, not vehicles. I feel like this one might not be a go-to one, given that the vehicle units tend to have good movement anyway, but often being able to essentially advance and shoot like this really is pretty powerful. It might make the difference between a key line of sight with enemy units that should by all rights be safe behind terrain, or stretching to an objective and still being able to open fire. It's basically a directly improved one of the movement boost that other units can get as well, so basically trying to keep the table a bit more relevant to vehicle units I suppose. Next up we've got Flitting Shadows, and this one's the Deny Overwatch one. The way that this one works is that when you do any of the things that could trigger Overwatch, making a move in the movement phase, setting up on the battlefield, or declaring a charge, you can activate this one when you do it, and then enemy units aren't able to Overwatch you until the end of the turn, so that means that you could trigger it in the movement phase, and they still wouldn't be able to Overwatch you in the charge phase either. The way that this one's worded though, you have to do it when you're selecting your units to make one of those moves. I guess that means that you'd have to declare it before the opponent declares Overwatch technically. It doesn't sound like you're necessarily supposed to know whether your opponent's planning to Overwatch a unit, and maybe have to use this in advance as a precaution. I guess for the setting up on the battlefield and the declaring a charge, that'll be done at the same time as Overwatch, so maybe there could technically be some scope for using it reactively then. Might not be the worst thing to have spelled out explicitly though. Either way, turning off Overwatch to any one unit is really big for Eldar. Eldari aspects are often very fragile to it. So if you had a squad of Howling Banshees charging across the board, just casually turning off Overwatch could be a really big deal to them to actually make sure that they get into combat and don't have half their squad gutted with bolter fire or flamers or something. This one could just be very nice to guarantee that the squad actually survives to deliver its hefty damage before the opponent gets to strike back. I do kind of wonder if certain units like Howling Banshees might get this built into datasheet abilities in some way, but I guess we'll see on that front. Next up, we've got another incredibly powerful one called Fade Back, and this one's a move when shot ability. So basically the opponent fires some guns at your unit. After they've done their damage and things, you then get to move the unit d6 plus 1 inches, which could be really quite powerful on anything that's at least somewhat tanky and needs multiple units to try and gun it down. You can't use it on Titanic things like Wraith Knights, though everything else is fair game. This one really is quite big. Say you could have a big chunky grav tank that gets shot and say loses 7 wounds or something, then just use this to have it just ghost behind terrain. If you were just peeking out to get a line of sight, then it should allow you to get to safety. It could just be really disruptive for enemy firepower. You think you've moved to get a line of sight with all of your units, and then the tank can just move somewhere different. And I feel like maybe this one's a little bit more balanced versus, say, just move, shoot, move, as it means that the Eldar players would actually be taking at least some damage from the scariest gun in the opponent's army potentially, before one of their units runs away. Just the existence of this does make coordinating a gun line against the Eldar really quite hard as well, as you don't know which units might be the one to move away and mess with your plans, and the Eldar player can use it on the one that they think is going to be most impactful when the enemy is lining up shooting. It is still a bit random, and you might just get unlucky and just roll a 1, so you get 2 inches movement basically. That might not be enough to save the unit in some cases. I feel like for infantry and things, you could have them just set up right at the edge of ruin walls, so if they're right next to the ruin wall, then any roll is going to keep them safe, and big rolls might give them more options. Overall, this one feels really powerful, and I have a feeling that it's going to get used a lot. Otherwise, this does seem to be the rule for the Guardian Defenders now, called Fleet of Foot, so a bit of a return of a classic rule there. This one just means that they can use this maneuver absolutely for free. It doesn't cost a battle focus token and doesn't stop another unit from using the same rule this phase, it's just something that they do now. I guess that's not too unhelpful to try and keep the squad safe, potentially if they're bodyguarding a Farseer but still want to shoot their Bright Lance platform, and it seems that that'll be the replacement for their Generate a Fate dice ability. It does seem fairly fun and disruptive, though at the same time I'm not necessarily sure that it's exactly what you want on, say, a backfield objective grabber style unit. Next up, we've got the more standard movement boost, which is Swift as the Wind. You'd use this on non-vehicle units, as the vehicle unit's star engines is just better, but this one just basically gives your unit an extra 2 inches worth of movement, and unlike the rest of them, you can use this one as many times as you want in a phase on different units. So in theory, you could just spend all of your tokens and give 4 different units plus 2 inches to move, if that was the best thing that matters, and none of the other clever tricks look like they'd have any results this turn. Unlike the star engines though, this one isn't locked just to normal moves. You can also use it for advanced moves and fall back moves, and that does give it a few options. I guess actually that does mean that it could sometimes be a choice of vehicles as well, given this is to give you a bigger movement threat if you needed to advance to get to an objective or something and didn't care about your shooting. In general, it's not going to be one to use for every unit each turn, just where it matters. Maybe one of the biggest things could be for charging units. If your unit's likely to be facing, say, a 7-inch or 8-inch charge or something, then an extra plus 2 inches to that makes it far more reliable. And it could leave some units with some really long charges. If Howling Banshees do keep advance and charge on their datasheets, that's a 21-inch charge threat range. Would even say just for other standard aspects on foot with a 7-inch movement, that means they'll be able to move 9 inches and then charge another 7 on average, around about 16-inch charge threat if they want it, and it'd certainly help out swift jet bikes too. Otherwise could be nice for stretching onto objectives, either just with normal movement and still shooting, or advancing if you needed the extra reliability to get there. Or could be good if the extra 2 inches is actually going to make the difference of gaining a line of sight on the opponent compared with not doing so. Again, it's not always that 2 inches will make that difference, but sometimes it will. I guess also if you're just looking to optimize positioning and none of the other tricks look like they're going to be particularly helpful this battle round, then it could just be one to burn your excess tokens to help out the army in a small way. Perhaps could be a nice enough one to use turn 1 perhaps, if it doesn't look like you're in massive danger of being either shot or overwatched. Finally, the last two revolve around melee things. The next one is Sudden Strike. This one's a plus 3-inch pile-in and consolidation move, selected when the unit's chosen to fight, as opposed to when they're chosen to pile in or consolidate. It maybe means that you need a bit of forward planning, and you don't necessarily know the result of the combat yet, whether or not they're going to be able to destroy their entire enemy unit. This one's often a fairly handy stratagem to access in various different detachments that have it, so being able just to activate it for 1/4 of your detachment rule seems pretty good. It can either be used to make sure that you get all your models into engagement range and get fighting. Sometimes with infantry they might struggle to do that, particularly if you're fighting with a bigger block of warriors of one sort or another, but otherwise the consolidation can just be really big. It might be the difference between being able to stretch onto an objective that you need to get to, or potentially wiping one enemy unit and then using that big consolidation to get into engagement range with the next thing, and give your opponent some really annoying choices as to whether or not they want to fall back with those, or remain in combat and sacrifice their movement, and maybe have difficulty with dealing with your unit as well. I feel like there tends to be enough situations where this can come up pretty usefully if you've got a few melee units on the board. Finally, last but not least, we have Opportunity Seized, and this one's a sort of melee-style reactive move, triggered when the enemy falls back from one of your units, and it basically means that your unit can make a normal move of d6 plus 1 inches. It is a normal move, so you wouldn't be able to do that if they're still in engagement range with a different unit as well. But again, getting surprise movement in the enemy turn is rather nice. I'd say that this one is maybe one of the most situational ones, but still really powerful. It depends whether your units wound up at the end of the fight phase, which you wouldn't necessarily be able to control all the time. and it depends whether or not that d6 plus 1 inch movement is going to be particularly meaningful. In general, it's going to be best if it's going to allow them to jump to the other side of a ruin and stop them getting shot quite as easily, or force the opponent to move in weird ways to get to grips with them. I feel like it's the sort of rule that might not come up all the time, but when it matters, it could matter in a really big way. Either making it harder for the enemy to shoot or charge your unit, and perhaps saving it from death. I guess in theory it could pair kind of well with the consolidation, getting extra things into engagement range, disrupt the enemy by making them have to fall back, and then also potentially even get more movement shenanigans out of the same unit if you can spare the extra battle focus token. Overall, I have a feeling that Aeldari players are probably going to be at least fairly pleased with the mechanic. It does look like it's really quite well thought through. Perhaps out of any of them, I feel like that move d6 plus 1 inches movement when shot looks really quite disruptive to the enemy. Maybe one of the easiest to use to gain power, but pretty much all the rest are really good as well. Deny Overwatch is absolutely massive for fragile damage dealers, reactive moves when falling back occasionally will matter really big, and then boosted moves in general can make your charges shorter or reliably get you to objectives, and the pilot and consolidation boost could be pretty meaningful if the opponent's left, say, a 6-inch gap between their units, and this allows you to tag the next thing and annoy the enemy plans. Getting 4 of those boosts over the course of the battle round is pretty massive. It kind of boils down to basically 4 free movement stratagem equivalents in a 2,000 point game. A fair few of them maybe do feel like the sort of fine movement shenanigans that are going to matter a bit more for perhaps experienced players that play on tournament style terrain versus more casual games perhaps though. I think it is going to be something that pushes Aeldari more towards being a slightly higher skill army, as you've got loads of really powerful options, but he needs to find and identify the things that are going to make use of those options the best. And also just think one step ahead to where your opponent's likely to move, likely to try and deal damage, and where you can keep your unit safe with those reactive moves and things. I feel like if you're able to do that, then it's just going to have vastly more power than if you're just plugging them into extra movement or making reactive moves that don't necessarily actually help you that much. And definitely one that's going to be a pretty big deal with having a good terrain set and using the rules properly, as Aeldari are going to be very dependent on hiding units. It does also feel like the sort of thing that's going to create more mental load for both players, the Aeldari having to think about 6 different movement options, as well as all of their stratagems and detachment buffs and datasheet rules. That's quite a lot of options to keep in your head to try and make use of your resources in the best way possible. It would also be annoying for your opponent to have to think about, as well as all the stratagems they've got access to, also having 2 different reactive move things to be wary of, and 6-inch pylons and consolidations and things. I feel like for someone who's not super familiar with Eldar, that's going to be a lot to have in your head to think that your opponent might be able to do. Overall though, it feels fairly fun and fluffy I think, generally feels pretty in line for Tricksy Eldar, and perhaps feels like it might be a little bit more engaging as opposed to plugging 6s into devastating wounds and Overwatch. Even if the Strands of Fate also had really quite big options as well with different ways that you could use them. Even if you don't get quite as much big damage bonuses from this one, I feel like overall it might be a stronger faction rule, or at least equally as strong. The movement and disruption options that these ones seem to bring do seem rather good to me. In any case, look forward to hearing people's takes as to the new special rule. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, or any other interesting uses of them that you can think of. As mentioned, if you're looking to pick up the new Codex and any fancy new Phoenix Lords and Aspect Warriors, feel free to check out the store's links down in the video description. They'll be going on sale from these times between Friday night to Saturday morning. A big thank you to anyone picking up some Warhammer things through them when they do happen to make purchases. In any case though, I'll leave this one there for now. I'll certainly be looking forward to catching up with any other Aeldari news previews over the course of the week. I'm sure Games Workshop will keep them coming, and I'll certainly do a full Codex review as soon as we get news and details. Finally, if you've enjoyed the video and want to help support Horsepeck's Tactics more directly, there is the channel's Patreon page, links down in the video description, if you want to help support and keep the videos coming. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description below. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.